Hello and welcome to episode 9 of the Wisdom from the Akasha podcast. My name is Susie. I am an Akashic Records teacher and practitioner, and today we will be talking about the spiritual awakening process. A couple of episodes ago, I went into the difference between enlightenment and ascension. So if you haven't listened to that episode first, then please do. And today I really want to go into the stages of the spiritual awakening that people most commonly experience. Before we get into the individual stages, there are a couple of points I would like to make first. Point number one is a Kundalini awakening and a spiritual awakening are different. You may experience both, but they are different from an energetic perspective. So today I am specifically referring to spiritual awakening, not Kundalini awakening. Point number two is that, of course, everybody's spiritual awakening journey is different. It is very normal that you can be experiencing more than one of these stages at one time or in a different order. So if you're listening to the stages and you think, well, this came before this for me, please don't panic. I'm just going to go through the stages that I have experienced and that a lot of my clients have talked about experiencing. But if your spiritual awakening journey has been different or you're experiencing multiple stages, that's completely okay and that's completely normal. The spiritual awakening process is quite complex, especially from an energetic perspective. And with episodes like today, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give your linear brain something to have to work with, giving your linear brain a framework so that it can understand what it's going through, what the key energies at play during that stage is, and how to navigate through them. Point number three is, of course, that process of ascension that we talked about in a previous episode. It includes multiple spiritual awakenings. Spiritual awakening doesn't tend to just be one occasion. You tend to experience multiple spiritual awakenings throughout your ascension journey. Point number four is the spiritual awakening journey tends to start when you move the 200 level of consciousness and above. When you move from a victim survival mindset into operating more from a position of will and self determination. Now, for some of you, there will have been a specific event that happened to trigger this spiritual awakening. For others, it will have just been a natural progression. Either way, your journey is your journey. Lastly, before I get into the individual stages, if you have experienced a spiritual awakening, multiple spiritual awakenings during this incarnation, this was very much designed by your soul. In your soul's blueprint, which we connect into in the Akashic Records. Things like experiencing a spiritual awakening, experience a Kundalini awakening, are very much part of your soul's plan before coming into the incarnation. Not everybody who is incarnated at this time has chosen to experience a spiritual awakening during this time. And this is why it is never your job to wake anybody else up. Spiritual awakening happens usually as a result of multiple lifetimes of experiences, of initiations, and your soul knows prior to coming into an incarnation that there is going to be an awakening. If that isn't in somebody's blueprint, then it doesn't matter how much you tell them about things, it doesn't matter how much you send them videos or try to explain things to them, that it's just not what their soul has signed up for in this incarnation, and that is completely okay. It does not make anybody better than anybody else if they have chosen a spiritual awakening. It is just one of those things that a soul can choose, and it is all based upon the level of evolution and development that a soul has experienced in previous incarnations. Let's now get into these stages. The first stage of the spiritual awakening tends to be a very pleasant experience for most people. This can be, as I said earlier, triggered by a specific event, or it can just be a natural experience after you've worked on raising your own consciousness level. And this is when you really start to have an experience of oneness, of bliss, of maybe abiding in love. It's a very high consciousness, high frequency experience. And during this time, you do experience a partial ego death. You will feel very connected to your guides. You will see signs and synchronicities everywhere. And you will just feel very elated. Everyone is different in respect of how long this initial experience lasts. For some people, it may just be a one-off hour-long experience. For some people, it can last a month. Everybody is different. The problem that happens with this stage is the belief that at this point the ego is dead. There is a partial ego death. You do lose part of who you thought you were, but there is not a full ego death at this stage. This is important because what happens in the later stages of the awakening process is the ego will attach itself to your spiritual journey and your spiritual development. And because you will often have a belief that you no longer have an ego, you aren't on the lookout for the ego doing this, and therefore you aren't on the lookout for spiritual ego. And the ego loves the spiritual journey. It loves to have something to attach itself to attach its identity to. So I really want to just make that point that at this stage, you may feel like that old you has died off, that that ego has been lost, but it is only a partial ego death at this stage. Now, because in stage one, you tend to be experiencing extremely high levels of consciousness, you can't maintain that forever without having done your work. Stage two is that crashing back down to reality. And it's a really difficult stage because you want to go back to the frequency that you experienced in stage one, but you don't know how to get there. Stage two is commonly referred to as the dark night of the soul. And the dark night of the soul is a little bit of a misnomer because it tends to last a lot longer than a night for most people. Dark nights of the soul can be extremely painful. It can be very overwhelming from an emotional perspective because what you are doing is you're essentially going back into frequencies of the below 200. So emotions such as anger, guilt, shame will come up during this time. And also during this time, you often experience what is called the void. The void and the dark night of the soul often go together. And the void is when you do not feel your guides around you. You do not see the signs and synchronicities. You feel very alone and you feel like you have been abandoned during this time. This stage is governed by the divine feminine energy. And when we come to the divine feminine energy, the practices that we need are all about going inside. They are all about getting into the body. This is not a time when you should be trying to go up in levels of consciousness, because what can happen is you can essentially start to bypass the work that needs to be done. Now, sitting in our pain, in our discomfort, is not nice. And if anybody is experiencing the dark night of the soul and they feel like they need to reach out to somebody to support them through it, then I would always recommend that you do that. But please understand that because it is governed by this divine feminine energy, it's very much about turning our focus inwards. It's not about going up and out, it's about going inwards, dealing with emotions that we have repressed throughout our lifetime, traumas that we have experienced. This is very much the deep healing phase of the journey. I should also note here that when I refer to the void in this instance, I'm referring to that state of not experiencing support, feeling like your guides have abandoned you in respect of that stage of spiritual awakening. I'm not referring to the void in respect of a higher dimension of consciousness that you're going to experience through your meditation practice. Now, when we come to stage 3, this tends to be the sponge stage of the awakening journey. You've been through this painful dark night of the soul, and you've started to look into different healing modalities, different ways of helping yourself through this journey. And this is a very informative time. There are two problems with the sponge stage. Number one, you can get so busy with learning new modalities, reading more books, watching more YouTube videos about certain topics that you don't actually do the work that's required for moving through all of that energetic stagnation that was coming up during that dark night of the soul. We can often use information and absorbing information, consuming information as a way to bypass doing the actual work. The second problem with this stage is that your spiritual ego can really kick in at this stage. So remember, in stage 1, we feel like we've had this partial ego death, but we can often confuse that with full ego death. And in stage 3, when you're starting to learn all of this information that you maybe have never come across before, your ego is going to attach itself to that information and the learning that you're going through, and it's going to start really developing into what's called spiritual ego. I will say is a completely normal part of the spiritual journey to develop a spiritual ego. Our only job is to be mindful of that fact and to recognize it in ourselves so that we can move through the awakening journey, the ascension process with much more ease and grace. If during stage 3 you are consuming, you are taking in knowledge, and you are balancing that with your own ritual practice and your own work, you may find that during stage 3 that you start to receive spiritual downloads or receive more information through your clair senses, your psychic senses. And this can be really exciting, but please understand that most of the time at this stage, what you are experiencing are astral experiences. You have an astral realm and you have a spiritual realm. And the astral realm is the closest realm to us in our physical dimension. During this stage, as you start to open up to these energies that you may not have been aware of before, it is extremely important to focus on developing your discernment, asking yourself, does this guide or this information resonate with me? Do I feel that this is coming from a place and in alignment with unconditional love? It's very important during this stage to question everything that you are receiving and to just take time to allow information to marinate, to work upon you, to really sit with it and feel into, does this resonate with me? This goes for information that you are receiving from people like myself and also from energies that you are now tuning into in other dimensions. The focus on discernment is so important at this stage because in the astral realm, you are going to experience energies who are of the light, who want the highest good for you, and also energies who are not of the light, who don't necessarily want what is in your best interest. They want to feed your ego. Stage 4 of the spiritual awakening journey is healing work and hermit mode. And you will now be experiencing this heightened sensitivity to everything. Those new clair senses that have come online, or those clair senses that you had that have become more developed in stage 3, are now picking up everything. And human day to day life can feel very overwhelming. You can feel very overwhelmed with other people's energy, with what's going on with the collective energy. and you can just find it really difficult to be around people. So you can often take yourself into a little bit of solitude. It also tends to be the stage where you realize just how much work that you have to do, how much healing work is involved, how much work is involved in regulating a dysregulated nervous system, in balancing your chakras. And it can really feel a little bit overwhelming, and it can feel like that the whole process is just too much. And what's the point in all of this? It's often at this stage that people will say they just wish they could go back to a time before their spiritual awakening, that they just wish they could live like everybody else does. And the thing is, if your soul has signed up for a spiritual awakening experience, unfortunately, there is no going back. It may be overwhelming and it may feel exhausting, but your soul wants to go through this experience because it wants to evolve. Stage 5 then comes in when you realize that you can't bypass, you can't avoid doing that deep inner work, and you also can't go back. You can't go back to a time before you were awakening. This is when you really start to do a deep dive on your deprogramming, your deconditioning, your shadow work, your inner child healing. This is when you really start to take that healing work very, very seriously. And you also start to take the pressure off yourself in respect of getting it done. In the previous stage of healing, because the ego is still very involved in the process, there tends to be this impatience of, it should all just be done now. Why isn't it all done already? And that urgency is always an ego quality. The soul is never in a rush, but the ego always is. When you get to stage 5, you have a lot more kindness, a lot more compassion towards yourself, and you know that taking each stage and taking each piece of healing work that's needed is just part of the process, and you take this pressure off yourself that you're not behind schedule, you're not off track, that this is just part of the process. Stage 6 then is about these lessons being mastered and really about surrendering, giving up that I need to control everything, I need to be in charge, I'm in a hurry, and really surrendering to the process, working on balancing your internal masculine and your internal feminine energy, and really integrating all the work that you have done. A lot of times people will believe that they have become enlightened at this stage as they start to implement more of the direct path practices, but the ego is still there. It is starting to dissolve at this stage. During stage 6, you really start to tune into what is known as the cosmic levels of consciousness, and you start to receive information and guidance from the higher spiritual realm. You're getting less information and guidance from the astral realm, and you're moving into a deeper practice and a deeper connection to the higher spiritual realms and the energies that exist in the higher spiritual realms. In stage 6, this is also where being in alignment to your soul purpose is your priority. You have moved from a position of wanting to try and control everything, really focusing on things like manifestation, and now it's just about living in alignment to that soul's purpose. Now, your soul's purpose is always your highest timeline. Living in alignment to your soul's purpose is your highest timeline. But it's at stage 6 that not being in alignment with your soul's purpose becomes really uncomfortable. And it's that balance of surrendering to higher guidance and also taking aligned action. Stage 7 is transcendence, where there is no belief or feeling of separation anymore. You are fully surrendered to the flow of life, and the driver behind everything that you are doing is service to others. The ego is not involved. You are guided always by the divine, by source consciousness, by God. The paradox with this stage is You are energetically more detached from people and the world, but you actually feel more connected because of the understanding of oneness, of everybody being one. You are living in full alignment to your soul's purpose at this stage, and everything you are doing is from that place. There are, of course, many different modalities that you can use throughout the various stages to help you along this process, to help you with any healing work that you have to do. And please always be guided by your own magnetic center. Your magnetic center is designed to bring into you teachings that you need, practices that really resonate. So please do be guided by that. And I hope that by having an understanding of the different stages, you will see that at different times, different practices are required. For example, at times where the process is very much about going inwards, practices which really help you connect to and strengthen your connection to the body are going to be the most helpful. When you are taking in information, practices that support that taking in of the information, but then allowing the information to work upon you are going to be very supportive. The spiritual journey is not about just going up into higher dimensions and not living a human existence. It's not about not being embodied. It's not about avoiding actual real life. It's about balancing both, and it's about operating from a higher level of consciousness, bringing your light to the world, and then operating within the world. As I said at the start, this may not be how you have experienced your own spiritual awakening. You may have experienced these stages in a different order, or they may have come at the same time for you. Whatever you are experiencing is valid. Please don't ever think that I am ever invalidating anybody's personal experience. That's not my intention. My intention is just to give you a framework, a guidance point, so that your linear brain has a system that it can say, right, this is what I'm going through, this is what it's for, and now I need to focus on this point. And it also then knows what potentially is going to come next, and it's going to give you a lot more grace to be able to work through the stages as you need to be able to work through them. And please, if you are someone who finds yourself going over these stages multiple times, please don't get disheartened or overwhelmed. It is completely normal to go through these stages multiple times before you start to experience stages 6 and 7. I hope that you have found this episode useful and that it's given you a little bit of a framework to work with. I really appreciate everybody supporting the podcast, ranking the podcast, commenting on the podcast, although I haven't yet worked out how to comment back, but I do read the comments and I do appreciate them always. I will see you all next week for the next episode. I hope that you all have a beautiful, restful weekend, that you spend some time with your loved ones, and that you just spend some time being.